Manpig. They called him Manpig because of the ghastly snout-like cleft in his chin and a chronic lung disease that left him with a raspy voice which tumbled out of his mouth as grunts and squeals. Like a pig. Naturally, it wasn't exactly a term of endearment. See, Manpig and I were together in school, and so I was a personal witness to the hell that he was put through by other kids. It wasn't strange to see flocks of mean teenagers buzzing around him, stripping away at his dignity like woodpeckers with their nasty barbs. And that was when he wasn't busy getting his already unappealing face rearranged by others, all simply for being who he was. Can you imagine what that's like? To have violence heaped on you for simply existing? To be used as a stepping stone for someone looking to climb the social ladder? Things weren't better at home for him either. A mother who was addicted to meth and an abusive alcoholic father made up his family, and I'm using that term very loosely here. It wasn't a surprise to any of us who knew him that he couldn't make much of his life at all. In fact, it was a damn near miracle that he survived decades of abuse and turned into the kind-hearted man people eventually came to know him as. Years after the rest of us had graduated, gone to college and or moved on with our lives, Manpig chose to go back to our high school to work as a janitor. He chose to shuffle through and clean the same hallways that had so tormented him. Maybe he was trying to exorcise old demons. I don't know. What I do know is that he happened to be there when my son was going through the most difficult period in his life. It was a cruel twist of irony that my son ended up facing the exact same sort of bullying that I had been a mute spectator to back in my own youth, and that too by the children of the very same people who had harassed Manpig back in the day. Just a vicious circle of rage and hatred. I was forced to contend with the same apathetic attitudes I myself had embraced all those years ago, forced to rage against the same ineffective institutions that had turned a blind eye to Manpig's abuse. Day after day of running around helplessly, trying to put an end to my son's bullying, made me finally understand just how deep the rot was in our community. Yet I couldn't do anything but watch the spark go out of my son's eyes as he turned into an empty husk, a pale shadow of the bright stream of sunlight he used to be in my life. Believe me, I tried everything I could to bring the torment to an end. I approached the school authorities, his teachers, the school counselor, the principal, but to no avail. They fed me platitudes, assured me it'll stop, but it never did. I spoke to the parents of the 4 boys who were the worst of them all, pleaded, cajoled, threatened to call the police. But it only ended up making things worse. My son started hiding his cuts and bruises. My efforts to help him had resulted in him pulling away from me. Manpig was a godsend at a time like this. He lent a ear to my son when he needed a confidant the most. Perhaps it was due to the fact that Manpig had been through the same shit he was now going through, but my son found it easy to open up to him. To this day I think those conversations were a major part of my son not taking a disastrous step. They bonded well, and my son came to look at Manpig as an uncle-like figure, who in turn completely broke down when my son's torment was escalated one last time. I was in office when I got the call that day. I remember how the coffee mug dropped from my hands and crashed on the floor, some of its shattered pieces bouncing off the tiles and landing on my shoe. I remember being in a daze as I walked out of the building, got into my car and drove to the beginning of the bike trail in the woods behind the school, now cordoned off by yellow tapes. I remember shoving aside uniformed police officers and retching when I finally saw him, how broken and bloodied he looked, how his skull had caved in at a point. I still have nightmares about my son's body lying in the dirt track out in the woods. We all knew who did it, but knowing something isn't the same as proving it in court. And besides, those 4 were kids. Juveniles. Even if they were to get convicted, the justice system would just spit them back out on the streets in a couple of years. No. Justice needed to be served here, and it wasn't coming from the varnished furnishings of a courtroom. Things needed a medieval touch. Once again, it was Manpig who swooped down like an angel and saved me from doing something irreversible. If it hadn't been for him, I would be rotting in some dank prison cell right now. He showed up at my house 2 days after my son was killed, crying and blubbering in his usual grunts and squeals. I'm so sorry. He wheezed, his chest getting racked with sobs and hiccups. I couldn't help him. He whistled a breath out of a blocked nostril. I should have been there. Should have stopped them. I wiped tears off my eyes and let him in. We talked about my son over a bottle of liquor and through the haze of cigarette smoke, quickly hatching a plan for revenge. No. Justice. We hunted them down one by one. Under the cover of darkness, through the shadows, we moved like death incarnate, stalking our prey. Once again, I could not have done this alone. Creating alibis, picking the right tools, cutting through chain link fences, getting rid of blood-soaked clothes. Manpig guided me through it all. Even when I was quaking in fear in my car, vomit stuck in my throat, wondering whether I had it in me to do it or not, he was there right beside me, patting my back and whispering that I could do it. For my son. For my boy, lost to the abyss far before his time. By the fourth one I was pretty used to it all. The sound of the golf club hitting the back of the kid's head, how my muscles stretched with each swing, the mist of blood and brain matter swelling in the air, the eyes rolling back up into the skull, the way their knees buckle as they collapse onto the ground. I felt nothing. Fear, sadness, elation. Nothing. Just glad that it was done. Over. Little did I know that a lifetime of nightmares was just about to start. He walked into the precinct and just confessed. The reporter's voice blared through the TV. The infamous local serial killer, responsible for the murder of multiple kids. I felt a lump in my throat. Manpig's grainy face was plastered on the screen, a hideous monstrous thing. A breath escaped my lungs. He'd done it. He'd taken the fall. One last gift for the father of the boy he'd cared for. He knew that the cops won't stop hunting, knew that we weren't perfect criminals, and that sooner or later we'd be caught. So he took it upon himself to put a stop to that bleak future by sacrificing himself. Or at least that's what I thought. Pictures of the victims started flashing on the TV. 5 of them, including my son. My head swooned, and I almost blacked out. I grabbed my car keys off the counter and ran out the door, each stride sending a knife through my heart. Slipping into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys with sweat soaking my clothes, I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. Surely there was a mistake. Surely they'd gotten it wrong, or were just trying to pin my son's murder on him as well, to tie up loose ends with a pretty little bow. They let me meet him. A cramped, cold, dimly lit cell. He stood up when he saw me, walked towards the thick bars, wrapped his bony hands around them. A noise erupted from his throat. A grotesque mixture of grunts and squeals, exactly like the one he'd made when he first saw me after my son's death. And that's when I understood what that sound actually meant. That when he met me that day, he wasn't crying. No. He was laughing at me. M-link vertical bar, T-link. 3:43 AM. The cheery chirp of my wife's phone rings through my tired ears. I force my eyes open to a squint, searching for odd numbers of my digital clock. 3:43 AM. It's that call. My wife shifts in bed, as she always does, and grabs her phone. 911. What's your emergency? She always answers like that. My wife used to be a police dispatcher, which left her with a lot of stories. Some funny, some tragic. She's been retired for 6 years, but every night at 3:43 AM she gets a call. Every night at 3:43 AM she answered. 911. What's your emergency? She'd run through the call from memory in a low murmur that I barely understand. 31 minutes and 27 seconds. That's how long the call always lasts. 31 minutes, 27 seconds. I remember when it first started. She had been so traumatized by the call that the phone calls were accompanied by night terrors. I remember that first week of waking up at 4:15 to her blood-curdling screams. It started simple. I would run out of the bedroom and find her in the kitchen thrashing around on the floor. I held her down to keep her from giving herself a concussion until her screams turned into ragged sobs. The next night she was standing by fridge stumping at nothing. The third night I found her curled into a ball on the kitchen counter. That was when I encouraged her to seek help. I became more serious after the 6th night. She'd been growing dark bags beneath her eyes from the restless nights by then, but she never remembered the previous night. I tried to be understanding, but what happened that night was the last straw. Everything happened like clockwork. 3:43 phone rings. 31 minutes 27 seconds. Hang up. I woke up that night when she walked out of the bedroom door. I sighed to myself and got up. I knew what would come next. I thought I did. 5 minutes pass, and the screams hadn't started yet. We'd seen a doctor by that point. He advised me not to wake her, but to just try and corral her back to bed. I had to make an exception that night. I ran out to the kitchen, and she was standing on the counter, like she had the night before. At first, I was relieved. I thought that maybe she was repeating a night's behavior, because it was in regression. I was wrong. There was a flash of light and suddenly she was holding a knife to her own throat. Her eyes were half open, consciousness barely there, focused on me. There was no screaming that night, just a grin. Not her grin. It was like a thin sickle plastered on her tired face. "You won't save her," she said in a voice that was deeper than hers. I charged, jumping on the counter and throwing the knife away. She fell limp in my arms, gently snoring. I checked her into a hospital that day, hoping someone there could help her. When I got home, I noticed her phone sitting on the side table. I considered bringing it to her, but my anger got the better of me. I was pissed and wanted to know who was playing mind games with my wife. I picked up her phone, but didn't know the password. I wanted her to rest, so I put it down on the nightstand and steeled myself to answer the call that night. I sat up that night glancing between the phone and the clock. 3:43, the phone rings. I snatched it up. "Who the hell is this?" I snarled into the phone. Nothing, then a quiet click and a whir. "Please, help me." A little girl's voice came through the speaker. She sounded shaky, scared. I opened my mouth to reply, but the voice kept talking. "There's a man in my house." There's a pause. "I don't know where he is." Another pause. "Him hiding upstairs in the bathroom." There's a crash, and the girl suppresses a scream. Her breathing grows rapid, as coming up the stairs. Her frightened statement was accompanied by a loud stomping. "I don't have anything." A deep voice creeps into the speaker. "Abby. Come out, Abby." The voice growls in an almost playful tone. The girl whimpers at the sound. "Please, hurry." She hisses into the phone. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of someone kicking at a door blasted through the speaker. The girl screeched through the phone. "Open the door, Abby." The voice growls in an almost manic euphoria. The voice's crazed laughter melds with the girl's screams until thud, plop. "You won't save her." The voice insists. Click. There's no sound. I look at the phone screen. 31:27. My finger hovers shakily over the end call button, but a voice stops me. "You're not the woman from the call center." The voice sounded like the one from the recording, the one my wife imitated the night before. What the hell is this? I tried to keep my voice from shaking. I don't want our pretty lady to forget me. The phone clicks. I look down at the phone, to be met with the lock screen. I went to the police that night with the phone, and told them everything. They were already familiar with me due to my wife's previous profession, and insisted someone would look into it. My wife came home the next day, looking more rested than she had in a week. The calls kept coming, but my wife's night terrors stopped. I never did tell her about my experience with the caller. I thought it would help her. It did, for a while. A week ago, I was watching the news. There was a fluff piece about some kind of festival that celebrated puppies until a breaking news update interrupted it. The update reported that a 6-year-old girl's body had been found. Her name was Abigail Miller, and she had disappeared 6 years ago. My wife had walked in at that point, dropped the plate she had carried, and wept. I held her that night until she cried herself to sleep on the couch. 3:43, phone call. 31 minutes 27 seconds silence. I walked out into the living, and she was asleep. I went back to the bed, laid down, and closed my eyes. Ping. My phone chimes. I check my phone. A text from an unknown number. "Cute wench's asleep." Ping. "See you soon." I haven't gotten much sleep since then. I spend my nights sitting in the corner with a knife. I don't know when he's coming, but he'll be ready. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.